Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission. We're so happy you took the time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for today's training. Today, we've got Howard Cohen as our instructor of the day. Howard's our virtual training coordinator here at Africa Fire Mission, and we always welcome him when he comes and teaches for us, does a lot of good in-person and virtual instructing for us here at AFM. Just a quick administrative note, if you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll get a certificate of attendance for today's class. The name that's on your screen is the name that'll be on that certificate, so if you need to adjust that, please do so now. If you can't stick around for the whole class or you get disconnected, keep an eye on the chat here soon. I'll be dropping a link to our Google Drive folder where you can get today's training or any other training that we've done in the past 2 years now. You can watch a video, answer a few questions, and we'll give you a certificate of attendance for that as well. Before we get started with the training, I'm going to pass things over to Howard for just a brief word of encouragement.
Hi, everybody. For this word of encouragement, I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Always takes a bit of adjusting to get the green bar spaced out properly. So I wanted to. We talk a lot about the family of the fire service, of being how we're there for one another, kind of the brotherhood, if you will, or fraternity. And my talk today is going to has to do with our mental health and emotional and spiritual health in the fire service. And so I wanted to share this particular quote with you. It's based on it's a summary of a study. I didn't put I didn't leave the reference actually in there, and what it says is that the number one predictor of how someone will recover after a traumatic event is how safe they feel in their relationships. We are in this together. We have to work with one another, and we have families that are impacted by what happens to us as firefighters and first responders. And so it's so important that we cultivate safe and valued relationships in order not only to benefit them, but to really benefit us in our own recovery from the trauma that we experience in responding to emergencies. So I wanted to highlight and emphasize the importance of connection, of relationship. And in doing that, also, I want to take this to another level and refer to a German philosopher named Martin Buber, who talked about something called the I-thou versus the I-it relationship. The I-it relationship is when I relate to something as an object, merely a thing. That's, in his words, something unholy. It's necessary, but it's not a particularly holy relationship. But when we relate to one another and the world around us as if they are like a thou, like an us, that there's something about them that's holy and special and like us, then that's a divine and holy relationship. And it's in that relationship that we truly experience the divine's presence and holiness in our lives. And that's really what this short quote is saying, that when we don't have those relationships in our lives, it's much more difficult to recover from the trauma that we experience. So I want to encourage you to pay special attention to how you are in relationship with your peers in the fire service, your family, and in the world around you, because that's really going to help you as you go through your first responder career. And that is my word of encouragement for us today. And from there, I'll take it and begin my formal talk. So let me jump to the first slide and say, shifting gears, it's great to see all of you, although I'm not actually looking at your faces. I hope I'm not even seeing myself, so I hope I'm looking at my camera. It's my objective today. Sometimes it doesn't happen when you're doing Zoom sessions. So I'm going to be introducing you to what's called critical incident stress management, or in shorthand, we call it CISM. This will not make you a system trained person, but it will give you an introduction to this process. But more importantly, there will be elements of what I present here that I hope will be beneficial to you as individually and as you grapple with and encounter trauma, but also much more importantly, in some respects, to help you with your peers as they're also grappling. So before I jump in, I just want to say thank you to all of you for committing this time to be here. I'm grateful for Africa Fire Mission for giving me this opportunity to teach you, and I'm just so grateful that all of you are here. I appreciate all of you for being here, and I do hope to make sure that this time that you have committed to be here is not a waste of your time. So on that note, the last few weeks we've been talking a lot about fire behavior, fire suppression. We had a presentation on reading smoke, and we're, all those elements of fire, learning fire behavior, learning how to read smoke, learning fire dynamics. Those are all how we fight the physical, the actual fire. But, there's another fire going on for us in the first responder world, and that's what's burning inside of us. That's what's happening to us time after time of encountering trauma, encountering car accidents with people's body parts scattered all over the place, building collapses, fires. That's a different kind of smoldering building fire within us. And so I kind of want to use the metaphor of fire smoke reading and fire dynamics as a metaphor for getting to know ourselves better and the people around us, so that we're better able to provide support for one another and especially for ourselves. Because I just want to reiterate this point. What happens to us gets passed down to our families. If we have a lousy, hard day at work, and we go home, if we're not taking care of ourselves properly and processing what we've experienced, we tend to take it out on our family, which is not something we want to do. So on that note, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to begin with a short video that just really talks about the emotional toll on firefighters.
We're sitting around the station. It was a Sunday afternoon, playing tiddlywinks or whatever. Probably not that, but I think we were playing cards. And I remember vividly complaining. It was boring. So this is boring. There's nothing going on. I wish it was a fire. And then the bell tipped and off we went. There was a fire across the street from the Admiral Street Fire Station, right across the street. It took us about 5 minutes to get there. We were in a different part of the town. And there were 2 kids in a red bedroom. Search went on, and they took the kids out, and they were dead. 2-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. No, it was 1.5 and 3-year-old. And I was on the rescue that day, detailed. I was normally on the fire engine, but for some reason I've been detailed to rescue. So the fireman brought the one baby to me and just handed it to me. And then the body was so hot, my gloves actually melted onto his skin. And then they brought the little girl out, and I had them both. And I brought them over to the rescue. And I was a fireman at the time. I wasn't even in EMS. I was an EMT basic. So I did what EMT basics do. I had both of them on the stretcher, doing compressions on one and bagging the girl. And anyways, I thought it was pretty bad, but I handled it, or so I thought, very well. Brought them to the hospital and tried, but they died. Then we have this thing called a critical incident stress debriefing. About a week later, and there was a veteran firefighter there, a guy named Billy. And we were talking about it, and it's supposed to help, but being an arrogant young man, I was didn't need this, and I was just kind of going along for the ride. And Billy broke down. I just couldn't understand it. I truly couldn't understand why, because that's what we do, The kids died, and it didn't bother me, and so I thought, but I talked to Billy some years later, and he remembered that incident debriefing, and he remembered looking at me and saying, yeah, he's going to be in my shoes someday. And sure enough, I was. It just culminates. That call 24 years later, it's vivid as yesterday. It truly is. And it stuck with me, even though I didn't think it would. And all the other calls that went after it, they just add up. They really do. And it's, we deal with it, we go on, but it changes you. It changes you a lot. And plus age, and I don't think we're anything far different from people aging and experiencing life. It's just a little more colorful at times, I think.
So you heard him mention CISM, Crisis Critical Incident Stress Management. It's a program that was established about 50, 60 years ago, and it's been developing and is proving in many ways really helpful for first responders to kind of come to grips with what's happening. As I talk more about this, the whole incident, the whole process of stress and how it affects us, you'll see why it's important to do something, have this kind of system. So let me backtrack though and just tell you about myself a little bit, because I kind of forgot to do that in the beginning. So I retired from active fire service after 20 years. And as I was retiring, I got involved with Africa Fire Mission. And so I consider Africa Fire Mission now my fire service. Between the teaching and the travels to Kenya and other things I do for them, this is my fire department. These are, all of you are my members of my fire department, as it were, and as well as the actual AFM folks. So I also got involved with CISM, and I'm a member of two teams here in the state where I live. One is called the Green Mountain Crisis Incident Stress Management Team. We've been around for a little over 30 years. I happen to be the president of that group. And there's another group that was recently started known as Secure. And that group is a little bit different in that they're funded in a way that, well, we're not funded, but they have some money. But we work together, and I'm a part of both teams, and responding to fire departments mostly. Sometimes we do other areas of first responders, like ski patrollers, sometimes police departments, but mostly they have their own in-house services. And we actually have done some work on school campuses where there's been incidents, and the staff wanted some kind of debriefing done. So that's my background, and I am a trained system facilitator in both in all aspects of it. So that's me. That's my background. So system, what it is, it's a short-term, peer-to-peer stress reduction program. Each of those words is important. Number one, we're not therapy. We don't pretend to be therapists. We are peers working with peers in a structured way in order to help our peers reduce the stress from a traumatic event that they've experienced. And that's a really crucial piece, particularly here in North America. A lot of folks, a lot of first responders are hesitant to go to therapists because they think that that'll work against them in some way, but they're more comfortable talking to their peers. Plus, they want to talk to their peers because their peers understand what they've gone through. We've all been, all of the members of my team have all been through, we've all been in the fire service or, EMS service one way or the other. We've all encountered the horrible experiences. We've all had to process them in one way or the other. So peer to peer, it's about that relationship, cultivating that important relationship, that safe relationship that you can say to somebody, hey, I'm having a hard time with this. And they're not going to mock you. They're not going to make fun of you. And they're not going to hold it against you. And I want to emphasize again, system is not therapy. It's peer-to-peer in a structured way, helping to process. Goals of system are pretty straightforward. They're to help you as a first responder return to a good emotional, psychological state of well-being. And it's to help you develop resilience, because you're going to learn skills along the way, in the debriefing process, that'll help you down the road. And what we found is that by early intervention with this kind of peer-to-peer service, helps to reduce more serious PTSD problems down the road. In other words, as you'll see why, we're able to take some of the load off. With each stressful encounter, it builds on us. And so what we're able to do is, with this kind of process, is reduce the stressors, over time, and reduce some of the challenges. So System services are designed to enhance, perform, and increase stress resistance. That's what it's all about. We lessen the impact of the critical incident. We normalize instinctive reactions to the incident. Also, I want to emphasize something here, which I think comes up again later. Every one of us has a different response to a crisis. Whatever our response is a normal response for us. So, there is no abnormal way of reacting. You're not supposed to respond in a, emotionally, psychologically, in a particular way. But sometimes what our normal way of responding to these kinds of things is not a healthy way. So what we want to do is not normalize an unhealthy response. This will become a little bit more clear as I go through this. We want to encourage a natural recovery process. By that I mean a not natural recovery process and an unhealthy one is to use things like drugs, alcohol, inappropriate expressions of emotions like anger inappropriately or overeating or eating junk food. What we want to do is encourage natural, healthy ways to recover. We want to restore our adaptive functioning skills and or those of the group members, our team members. In other words, we don't want one of our team members to be weakened to the point where they're a threat or a danger to us on the fire ground. So we want our team members to be, their health to be, improved and strengthened. And not unimportantly, we also want to be able to identify if someone's going to need further support services or therapy. We'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through this, but these are the general goals of SISM. And you can see they're all about helping the first responder get back to where they ideally want to be or where they're in their most healthy place, where they're the most healthy and beneficial contributor to a team. SISM has a couple of different categories to it. There's assisting individuals, and then there's group crisis intervention. In terms of assisting individuals, you all do these things probably pretty intuitively. You assess someone. You arrive on the scene, you see someone, boy, that person looks like they can need a hand. That's assessment. Psychological first aid is actually also something you probably do because a lot of first responders do this intuitively. You arrive on the scene, you see it's raining, someone's standing there getting wet, and you go, I bet they need a blanket or something to cover them up. You're helping them out. So without going into too much detail about each, what psychological first aid is, I'm just giving you a taste of how it is to help the person you're dealing with. There's a whole other class that we'll offer on psychological first aid. One-on-one intervention, that's just when you see a mate's having a hard time, you put your hand on his shoulders and say, hey, do you want to talk? All right, that's all part of what assisting individuals is about. The group sessions are a little bit more involved. There's 3 kinds of ways of group intervention. One is informational crisis intervention, and this means there's a big fire at a school, and there's lots of confusion. A lot of people don't know what they need information. So being able to provide useful, information that doesn't agitate people, that's what the informational crisis intervention refers to. Diffusing is what you might do immediately after an event happens with people. You sit them down and you say, do you want to talk? What do you need to say? It's immediate, and it's about just making sure that some of the steam, the pressure that's building because the event gets let off. Debriefings are a little bit more involved, usually take place somewhere between a week to 10 days after a crisis, only involve people actively involved in the traumatic event, and follows a very specific short procedure, which I'll touch on a little bit later on. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of physiology here. SISM is brain training. Now, your brain is like a muscle. I mean, it really is a muscle. And we can develop the different aspects of our brain through a whole variety of activities. I'm sure you've probably heard about things like, doing crossword puzzles or word games or things like that to keep your brain sharp. That's brain muscle. That's working. That's trying to develop your brain muscle. Really important. Thing is our brain has basically, roughly speaking, has two halves, a right brain and a left brain. And there are these things called neural pathways. And the neural pathways are the way in which information is is um, um, is communicated to which part of the brain. So you're at a traumatic event. There's the event. You're processing this information. It's going in through your eyes, through your nose, through your ears, and you're getting all kinds of signals. And the way that your brain has been developing, it's an evolutionary thing. The brain's most likely, without any intervention, is going to send the information through the various ways that the brain gathers information, and then it's going to shift it down to what I call the survival brain, or the left brain. Why do I call that survival brain left brain? Because our primal instincts, fear, flight, and paralysis, those were survival instincts. They originated in the left brain. They're fine. We need them at times. They're important, but they also are not where we do our most creative thinking. And that's when we can change the neural pathway, the mental muscle, to the right side brain. And that's the thrive brain. That's the side of the brain where we're creative, where we're in touch with our emotions in a healthy way, where we're thoughtful. Both sides of the brain are important, but they have different functions for how we operate. And so part of what System is doing is going to help develop the mental muscles, the neural pathways, to take us into the thrive part of the brain rather than the survive part of the brain. Now, I know this might sound a little bit heady and maybe a little too physiological, but it's important to understand that System is about helping us, nurture this pathway as opposed to this pathway, which is what's going to happen almost, I don't want to say naturally, but that's almost the right word. That's what's going to happen if we don't do anything about it, because when we see trauma and those sorts of things, we go, it kicks us, it has a whole physiological effect on us that turns us to operate on the left side. So this gives you an idea, in terms of the left versus the right. The left side of the brain, it's where our impulses come from. It's where anger comes from. It's where our literal thoughts, it's where hyperactivity comes from. It comes where hypervigilance stems from. When I say stem from, I mean literally there's different parts of the brain, and we know now through brain mapping where these parts are coming, what parts of the brains are being activated. On the right side, you get things like regulation. That is, you can regulate yourself. You can manage your behaviors and your emotions. You can experience sadness and you understand what's happening. You have a big picture thinking. You have social skills. And so this is just a very incomplete list of differences between left and right brain. I don't want to get into the whole brain neurology sort of stuff. It's way out of my wheelhouse, but this just gives you an idea. Left brain, right brain. System is all about cultivating the right brain pathways into the right brain, because the brain is a muscle, and the muscle, you can develop it through exercises, through how you behave, and a whole host of other things. Now, let's just take a quick look. When you're angry, I don't know how well you could read all these things, but when you're angry, you can see this is where in the brain and here in the cortex, where all of this stuff, and we know this scientifically through brain mapping, it's all coming from here. That's the right side of the brain, the left side of the brain. It affects our stomach, it affects our groin, it affects our breathing, it affects our facial muscles and everything. So what we want to do is be on the right side of the brain and affect ourselves in a more positive way. All right. That's the background, the physiological background. Let's get more into the details of system. What is a critical incident? Okay, sorry for reading off of the PowerPoint. I don't want this to be a death by PowerPoint presentation, but sometimes you got to have the definitions right out there in front of you. For our purposes, critical incident is any event that can create significant human distress or stress and overwhelm a person's usual coping mechanisms. All right. I want to emphasize it has the potential. It can create significant effect. It doesn't have to necessarily, depending on where we are in our own, mental health, mental fitness development. And it overwhelms a person's usual coping mechanisms. So we all have different coping mechanisms, but it's what is our usual ones. And what's important, why this is important is because it needs to be unique. There's not a formula that you just drop on top of everybody, because we all deal with different things. We all have different life experiences. We all see a problem or a crisis from a different perspective. So we have to take that into account. All right. Technically speaking, there's two kinds of stress. There's what we call eustress. This is not terribly important to know or to remember, but I'm just going to tell it to you anyway. There's positive stress. We all know that the stress of needing to perform for an exam can help us perform better on it. We know that certain times, feeling pressure is not a bad thing. But then there's also distress, and that's the negative. That's the kind of stress that we can't process very well, that gets us into trouble, that, tempts us to do things that we don't want to be doing because it's how we deal with our stress. And we'll talk about what some of those kinds of behaviors might be. So two kinds of stress. This is kind of a repetition of this next slide from what I just said, but again, I want you to be able to see it while I read it, so you can really have a chance to internalize it. A critical incident is a potentially traumatizing event. Emphasis on the word potential. It is an unexpected, unusually challenging, or traumatic rescue event that has the potential to be overwhelming, to create significant stress, and to precipitate a stress injury. Stress injury is just another way of saying the effect of the traumatic event. Why is it potentially? It's not the circumstance of an event that determines whether it is traumatizing, but one's subjective emotional experience of the event. Let me be graphic here. You're a new parent. You have an infant child at home, and you are called to a scene that involves a child the same age as your child. That has the potential to hit you much harder than your mate who doesn't have kids, or your mate who's, doesn't have kids. So you're coming from you have a very different experience. So it's a subjective element. That's what I was saying before about there isn't one set thing. All right, I'm going to just skip through this one because we don't need to spend that much time on it. So here are some examples of work-related critical stress-inducing incidents. Take a second, peruse the list. If there's anything on this list that surprises you, you have a question about, or if you want to add to it, unmute and say, what about this, or what about that, or can you explain more about X, one of those things. So take another minute, look over the list. I don't need to read it to you. You could see it. Again, I'll pause for a little bit to see if anyone wants to add or say something about it. Okay, there'll be time afterwards also during the tea time. All right, again, a little bit of redundancy here about what stress is, but bottom line, stress, unhealthy stress stimulates the fight, flight, or freeze reflexes. Now, any kind of negative behavior related to stress is going to fall under one of these three categories, whether it's anger or, that's fighting. If you're trying to, numb yourself with alcohol or drugs. That's flight. If you can't function anymore, you can't get out of bed, that's freeze. So these are the bottom line, when you really break it down, these three categories are what is stimulated by stress. Stress can be accumulative. In other words, yet another, incident that just is wearing you down, or it can be catastrophic. I don't think I need to explain those all that much, but you get the picture. The point here really is that the cumulative stress is one that we really need to be sensitive to, because as first responders, we're seeing a lot of stuff over the course of time, and you never know when that one next event is going to be like, I just can't take any more of this kind of stuff. On the other hand, catastrophic events often happen when your friends are involved. And I live in an area with small towns, and quite often when we go in to do a debriefing, it's a bad car accident or something, and the fire service says, yeah, that girl who got decapitated was my brother's girlfriend back when they were in high school. It can be very personal. That's kind of catastrophic. And I want to reiterate responses. People react differently to the same event because everyone is different. You're a normal person, and your reaction to an abnormal event is your reaction. It may not be the same as that of another normal person who experienced or witnessed or was involved in the incident. That's really, really important. You need to remember that how you respond or how your mate responds don't have to be the same. In any case, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to handle stress, and that's what system is all about. Remember, system is to help your peers cope with the stress caused from the traumatic event. Or you could rephrase that and say, system is to help you cope with the stress caused from traumatic events. Broadly speaking, problems from stress fall into 4 categories. Cognitive, they create confusion, worry, self-blame, disbelief, intrusive thoughts, etc., etc. Emotional, shock, sorrow, grief, sadness, fear, anger, numbness, irritability, feeling numb. These are emotional responses to stress, negative responses. Social, we withdraw, or we end up in lots of conflicts. And physical, we might have fatigue, we might have headaches, muscle tension, stomach aches, sleep difficulties, loss of appetite, can't keep, eating junk food, etc., etc. These are all different kinds of stress-related symptoms, which, by the way, I want to go back to my metaphor about smoke reading. These are like reading the smoke coming from a burning building. What is the smoke telling you? Where's the fire? What's going on, right? We just had this presentation 2 weeks ago. Cyrus talked about to us about reading smoke. So these are like reading the smoke signals. Is your mate having, cognitive issues? Maybe there's some stress-related issues going on. More symptoms. These will be, this recording is available. You can go back and look at these things more closely. I don't need to repeat this. Here's a whole long list of unhealthy responses or coping mechanisms, unhealthy coping mechanisms to stress. Again, take a quick look at it, read through it yourself. I'm not going to read them all out loud. I've mentioned a lot of these in one way or the other. This is yet another example, another way of looking at how these signs, the symptoms or the signs of stress affect us. It sort of kind of goes along a continuum from, I'm not really sure why we call this ready here, but reacting, injured, critical, if you're in this critical stage here, you really need help. So it's like, again, it's just ways of reading what's going on with someone. All right, when we're talking about system, the specific program, there's 7 steps to it. There's 7 elements to it. There's the pre-crisis preparation. In other words, it's education, like you're doing right now. Well, then we have education. I'm not really sure what the difference between the two of those are, but that's the way the program was written up. There's the diffusing when there's an incident. Oh, I backtrack. Let me say, pre-crisis preparation is what you're doing now. Education is when you talk to someone who's having a hard time. You say, hey, I think you're having some issue. I think there's something going on. This is what I'm seeing. So that's kind of the education part. And hey, I have some information that might be useful to you. Diffusing is getting someone to talk about it right away. The debriefing is a structured way of processing. And then we get into one-on-one crisis intervention if it's needed. When we do our debriefings, we always have a clinician with us, and we always tell the participants that if they need more, if they want to, there's someone available to talk to them one-on-one. That could be a peer. Sometimes they end up pursuing with a therapist. I think I'm gonna just not really mention much about these slides, but just to kind of give you again context of what we're working with. Again, the program is going to be it's recorded. You can go back and go into more detail. So at the bottom level, we have, this is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So at the very basic level, we have the bottom level, we have basic needs: physical safety, food, water, shelter. We need to be dry. We need air to breathe, we need clothing, and we need sleep. These are basics. So when we are dealing with trauma, we need to remind ourselves of these things. As first responders, oftentimes we go a long time without eating, and sometimes we're not drinking as much as we should, or we're definitely not sleeping. But when we're dealing with other people who are themselves are in the midst of crisis or trauma, we need to pay attention that these basic needs are met. If these basic needs aren't met, you can't go to the next level. The next level is when you start talking about people's safety, their personal safety, and employment security, and their health, or their property. All these things kind of factor in. You go to an incident, somebody's really worried that because of this accident, they might miss work. They might lose their jobs. And now on top of their dealing with this incident, they've got some employment security issues. Same again for us as first responders. If we're concerned that we might lose our job or lose out on a promotion if someone thinks that we're not, as well off as we should be. And then there's this whole sense of belonging, of social needs. And it goes back to the words of encouragement that I started with. It's really important. Okay, now as we're talking about, let's talk about the basic system skill. The basic bottom line skill that you need to develop is listening. That's why I asked as a question, are you listening? Listening is the absolute most critical thing. By the way, listening doesn't mean you actually understand what they're saying. It doesn't mean that you know what they're saying. If you've ever dealt with someone who doesn't speak your language, but they need to talk, they just need to talk, and they just need to know you're listening, that they're not talking into the air. And that could be in itself as the healing that they, what they need to help in their healing process. I could tell you from my personal experience, I used to work in prisons. I was a chaplain in a prison. And one day I got called over to a cell, and an inmate in the cell wanted to talk to me. He had a very heavy accent of some sort or another. And in the environment, it was a lot of noise going on. He didn't want his cellmate to hear him. So he's talking into this metal grate, talking to me, and I'm listening in. I kid you not, he talked to me for 20 minutes. I do not know a single word he said, but I had my head tilted in. I was listening. I was looking at him. When he looked up at me, I looked up at him. And then after about 20 minutes or so, he wiped his eyes and he looked at me and said, "Thank you," and walked away. I kid you not, I have no idea what he said, but I was there listening to him, even though I didn't actually understand what he was saying. So listening is critical. When you're listening to someone and you are in a conversation, you are in dialogue, you need to, we often struggle with, what do I say? That's one of the big things that keeps people from actually reaching out to help other people who are having problems, because they say, I don't know what am I supposed to say? I don't know. So That's legit. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, but when you are saying things, here's some things you want to avoid. You'll want to avoid saying, I know how you feel. Boy, that's something that really pisses me off when someone says that to me. Why? Because truth is nobody knows how I feel. My feelings are my feelings, right? So you don't want to tell someone I know how you feel. You want to let them tell you how they feel. And then you can affirm their feelings. Say, got it, I hear you. You're feeling sad. You're feeling scared. But if you say, I know how you feel. You must be feeling X. And the person goes, no, that's not how I'm feeling. Then you've inhibited the potential in that dialogue. You never want to tell someone it's not so bad. Yes, it's always worse. Someone can always tell you a worse story, but it's really important. When a person is in trauma, person's experienced crisis, you don't want to say, hey, it's not so bad. It could have been worse. You could have lost both legs instead of just one leg. You don't want to do that. So you don't say it's not so bad. Now, this next one we could probably have a heated discussion about this. And this is that this was God's will. This is tricky. There are a lot of people who believe that what happens is God's will, but you don't know that person that you're talking to believes that. So it's best not to bring in your personal theology or personal beliefs, because it could be really offensive to someone to say, this is what's God's will. And that person might go, well, why the hell would God want this to happen? And you don't want to get into that because you're dealing with the initial trauma. So it's best to avoid something like, introducing your own personal theologies. Not saying that your personal theologies are wrong or they're right. I'm just saying that when you don't know who you're interacting with, it's best not to bring it in, because that's not what your job is to do at the time. Similarly, God won't give you more than you can handle. Again, you might believe that, but you don't know if the person you're interacting with does. Best to avoid it. You never want to tell somebody that others have it much worse. You got it bad here in this car accident in here with your leg crushed there. How about the guy over there who just, had his head cut off? That doesn't give anyone any comfort. You also don't want to tell someone you just need to forget it. You just don't worry about it. Forget about it. It'll all get better. It won't. It'll get buried and it'll resurface. Okay. I'm going to leave this slide for you guys to look at on your own. It gets into I don't want to complicate things with this acronym, and I probably will remove this from the presentation in the future. It's important stuff, but I think it's a little bit beyond what we need to do in our limited time frame. Okay, so here's a model for how to intervene with somebody. Start with introducing yourself, just like you did with first aid. When you learn first aid, hey, I'm Howard. I know first aid. Can I help you? Right? We all learn how to do that in the beginning of our first aid training. Okay, so introduce yourself. Let them know who you are and why you're there and what you're going to do. Address their basic needs and stabilize them, just like we do in first aid, right? We have to we do the assessment. We decide, okay, we got to stop the bleeding and we got to get them stabilized, but we also have to get them safe, right? So we have to get them so you're doing the same thing when it comes to the emotional and the psychological stuff. You listen to their story. You let them tell you what happened. You let them tell you their reactions. And you can reflect their emotions. Sounds like you were scared. Are you feeling numb? You're asking them the question, they can answer it. You're not telling them. You're not saying, I bet you're feeling numb. You paraphrase what they say. And you help them normalize. What you're experiencing is normal. It's normal for you. What you're feeling, you're not crazy. That helps someone understand that their reactions in the moment are normal. You want to focus on the situation. Attribute their reactions to the situation, not to any personal weakness in them. Hey, dude, there's nothing wrong with you because you're feeling sad about what happened. It's a terrible experience that you witnessed a terrible thing. It's not your weak. You're not a weak person. You're not a poor firefighter. let them know that it's not about their personal weaknesses. When they're ready, introduce stress management tools, and if also necessary, help them identify external support or resources. Now let's talk a little bit about suicide before we wrap this up. CCDR, suicide intervention. I know some of you guys are going to disagree with me, going to challenge me on this, but I'm going to push back hard. When you suspect someone is suicidal, there used to be this theory that you shouldn't say anything about it because you might trigger them to actually act on their suicide. We know absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that that's not what happens. If you suspect someone is suicidal, you need to say something to them. You need to intervene in order to potentially save their life. And here's a way to do that. Clarify. Hey, do you really want to die? Or you just want things to change? You want things to be different? Somebody says to you, oh, man, I'm thinking about, I want out of here. Don't be afraid to call them out and say, do you really want to die? Because we know from the data that's been acquired of the study of this is that when a person chooses suicide, they almost always make their final decision in the spur of the moment. And so if you have that sense that someone's at risk, you need to jump in. Contradict them. Desired outcomes will not be reached. Suicide does not solve problems. It creates more. So don't be afraid to challenge them in that respect. Do whatever you can to delay them. Stay with them, walk with them, talk to them, keep them on the phone, whatever. Delay them from being by themselves when and where they might be able to hurt themselves. And refer for continued care. If you go to check out this video online, actually, you know what? I'm going to try and put this in the chat real quick. This is a really, really good suicide program on suicide. I've just put it in the chat for you guys. So let me get out of here now. So suicide is a potential byproduct of traumatic experiences. SISM is designed to help reduce the possibilities of that in first responders. And this is something I recommend when it comes to suicide if you're there. So there's a couple last things I want to address. I already talked to you about this quote, that story. Look, it can happen to you, to every one of us. Any one of us as first responders is vulnerable to becoming affected by stress in a negative way. Remember, reactions vary and are unpredictable, but all reactions are normal and to be expected. You're not alone. When it happens to you or someone you know, take action. Reach out to one another. Now, after I finish up completely, I'm going to copy into the chat, and I'll put it on in the program a list of healthy ways of dealing with stress, and so that you'll have that access to that. It's all very self-explanatory, so that's why I'm not using this time to go over it. But I'll put the document in the chat. It will be available also with the video, and then however else we make information available to folks. So this is what SISM is all about. SISM is a structured way to intervene to help people deal with stress, help first responders deal with traumatic, stress-inducing experiences. I've covered a lot of territory. I hope it wasn't too much so that it became confusing to you, or left you wondering with more questions than than answers for how to deal with what's going on. So lastly, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to take questions after I close the slideshow. And as I always do, I end with a couple of quotes. This is one, and it says, "We don't rise to the occasion, we fall back on our training." This Kurt Wagenbach, I heard him speak after having dealt with an incredibly stressful experience, and I thought that it was important to include his reference into this passage. And lastly, since I know religion plays a big role in a lot of our lives, I want to encourage you to continue to have your faith in God, but trust in your training, because at the end of the day, it's your training that's going to make the difference in the moment. So on that note, I will stop my sharing and put the that document that I told you about into the chat for you. And I'll try to link it in the document before this goes live. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. So I'm going to stop the sharing and open it up for any questions, comments, reactions, thoughts that you might have.
Alrighty, thanks, Howard. If you folks have any questions, you can place your question in the chat. You can use the raise hand feature, or you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. See, we've got a question there from Gideon, I believe in Lilongwe. Gideon, what's your question?
Okay, thanks so much, Howard. I think it has been a very good presentation. Actually, rare. I think on my side, I think it has come in a good time. Of course, the question where I did not get it properly on the model individual intervention. You said as per procedure, you said you need to introduce yourself. Yeah, actually, we need to give background, who we are, what's the intention like, and blah, 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 blah. Secondly, you said meet basic needs and stabilize. On the stabilization, fine. But meeting the basic needs, I think I'm not able to get it right. What type of need, what type of these basic needs?
Sure.
Is it anticipation or is it just, or what are these basic needs that we need to meet? That's
Right.
question number one. Secondly is on suicide intervention, where the first question that we need to put it across, I was just thinking, the first stage is to clarify, do you really want to die? I'm looking at somebody who is already, or who has already made a decision anyway, and he's in a very critical situation, or is between two egos. So would you ask this kind of question, not to be more, I'm feeling like it's a question that may to some extent can provoke the particular person. Does it heal indeed? The question is, can it manage to heal somebody? So I have those two things first.
Great question. So let me do the easy one first. Basic needs. Basic needs is really like, you encounter somebody, and are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they cold? Are they wet? Are they hot? You want them to have feel physically safe and not so physically uncomfortable that you can't even get them to you can't begin the process of addressing the trauma, the higher levels. And again, when we talk about psychological first aid, we're talking there's levels of intervention that start with truly like the basic level of making sure that they're safe, they feel physically safe, they are physically safe, they're dry, they're comfortable. And then you can start talking about things like does someone need to be contacted? That's a next level of beyond the basic needs. But it's really that it's just a basic needs. If you take it into the first responders world, you've got a mate coming back from a really traumatic call. They're in their turnout gear. They're wet. They're cold, and you want to, and they're clearly something's up with them. So you want to say, hey, let's get you out of your turnout gear. Do you want something to eat? You want a cup of hot coffee? Do you need a cup of tea? You know, do you need to sit down? Are you hungry? You know, so that those are basic needs that you want to speak to when you're intervening with someone, whether it's, like I said, a peer coming back from a call, or when you're on an accident scene and you're dealing with the victim. So that level of basic needs. Is that one? Did I get to you for that one? Answer that enough for you, Gideon, to make that clear? All right, you're muted, but I'll take that as a yes. You can unmute if you need more. Okay, now the question about the suicide question. Yeah, our inclination, and this is kind of what we were in the early days. We were kind of taught, is that you don't want to feed the idea of suicide to someone who is suicidal. That is to say, expressing suicidal ideation. Somebody asked, but how do you predict or tell someone or a colleague who wants to commit suicide? Well, so let's backtrack to that first. So what are they saying? How are they behaving? Are they verbally saying, I'm tired of living. I just, I got so many problems. My kids don't like me. I don't have enough money. I'm losing my house. I just, if they're talking kind of desperation sort of stuff and saying, I want out of here, they're expressing that's suicidal ideation. If they're saying things like, I don't know what the point is, I don't know what the purpose of my life is, those are expressions of, thinking that they want to check out. Okay, so it's really hard to predict or know exactly someone wants to commit suicide, but what we do know is that when someone having suicidal ideation is an indicator that they might be prepared to hurt themselves. When someone starts to do things like, hey, I'm giving you my car, I don't need it anymore, I'm not going to need it anymore, or here's I want you to take care of my dog. Little things like that, or they're giving you cues that something's going on, that they may be thinking about it. So what we've learned is that actually when people do make this final decision to commit to take their own life, almost always it's a spontaneous decision. It's like they might be thinking about it for a while and and trying to come up with the courage for it, but it's an instance that they say that they're going to do it. This is why in our country here in the States, suicide by handguns is really common because so many people have handguns, have access to guns. They come home from a really bad day. They might have had too much to drink, might have had an argument with their boss or something. They come home, they grab their gun and they go, I'm done, and they shoot themselves. Now you can't predict that moment, but you can predict that the potential of it happening. So you predict, as it were, based on the things they're saying, based on the way they're expressing themselves. And when you call them out and you say, are you thinking about committing suicide? If somebody looks at you and says, yes, that's a red flag that says, we need to get you help. Lots of times people will say, no, I'm not, I'm just saying, I'm just talking. But it puts you on the radar screen. I see Blessing said, the best way is to distract an individual. That's delay. Distracting them is delaying them, distracting them. Oh, wait a second, you don't want to do that here. You're in a park. Kids might find you, you distract them. Oh, look over there. That's delaying. That's something very important to do when you're dealing with someone. But again, based on the studies that have been done, and this includes, dealing with people who attempted suicide and it failed. And, here's an amazing thing. A lot of people attempt suicide and fail, and then they have to live with the injuries that they caused themselves. Sometimes it's from a gunshot wound. Sometimes it's from the effects of self-poisoning. So there's a whole phenomenon after someone has tried to commit suicide. But it's about it's reading the signs. What are they saying? What are they doing? It is rare that somebody let somebody completely totally surprises everybody by taking their own life and not giving off any signals. Well, the signals might have been missed, but it just seems rare based on the studies that have been coming out and the research that's being done. So again, it's about relationships, paying attention to what they're saying, what people are saying, how they're behaving, how they're acting. That's what you're looking for. So yeah, more questions, comments?
Excellent, great answer, Howard. That that short answer. The research has shown us that talking with someone about suicide does not provoke it and can only be beneficial. So, some great information shared there. We're going to continue with our questions, but I'm going to wrap up the formal portion of our training today with a thank you to Howard for joining us and sharing his knowledge on this subject. It's pretty obvious that he's a subject matter expert here and has some great experience with this. So we thank you for sharing that with us all. And we thank you all for taking your time and your bundles to join us and better yourselves for that training. It's very much appreciated. Encourage you all to join us again next week and to invite all of your friends, anybody you know that might be interested, share the links with them. Keep an eye out in our WhatsApp groups. We'll also drop those documents that Howard has shared with today's training. I'll put those in the WhatsApp groups that we participate in just a little while. So thank you all. Hope to see you all again next week.